Welcome back. On to the second debate tonight. Let's give the left versus right protest some rest and talk about economy. Tonight, the focus on urban debate are other big crucial issues that are getting ignored, and one of them is economy. The economy is crumbling, and here are 6 indicators why the Modi government now needs to act and act fast. Indicator number 1 that we are looking at is just the growth figure itself. Take a look at the growth figure according to the government itself. Ministry of Statistics says that India will grow in the current year at about 5%. If you actually see the data of the last 3 months that's known and announced, we only grew at 4.5%. Consumer confidence has dropped to its lowest since 5 years to 85.7% in November 2019. Now, this is an indicator of just how confident you and I are generally feeling and optimistic about life, about our job security, about our appraisals, about the amount of money we have, about the progress we are making in life. And in all of that, it's the lowest that the confidence has been amongst people in the past 5 years. State Bank of India's research team has actually projected a growth of 4.6% for India. That's worse, and it is alarming. If you look at the car sales figures, there's not much of a turnaround that's taken place. Even in December, car sales figures had fallen by 8.4% for December 2019. Then let's talk about inflation, the data that's just come out today. Now, inflation for the longest time was not a worry in our country for the last few years. It was very low and hadn't been a cause of concern. But if you look at the data right now, and the data that's flashing in the screens right now, in CPI coming to 7.35%, in that food inflation, that is an indicator of how expensive your food material is getting, has shot up to 14% versus 10% in November. If this really sustains, it will become a bigger problem for the government. And of course, if you look at the various surveys that are being done across corporate India and across the world, CEOs are telling us that they are concerned about a slowdown in our country and a possible recession in the world. Let's take a deeper look at the inflation figures, viewers. This is the data that's just come out. 7.35% versus 5.54% in November. Food price inflation came at 14.12%. Vegetable prices jumped 60.5% on a year-on-year basis. Then, of course, there is fuel and light and clothing and footwear. That's not as big, but fuel will be soon, perhaps, because of what's happening globally. So this is something that the government and the agencies will be watching out for. How do we fix this? How do we get growth started again, revive the interest in our economy, get the companies to manufacture more, get the people to spend more, and get the growth going again? That's our focus. We've got about 2 weeks left for the budget to be announced. Let's say good evening to one of the most respected voices in the world of economics and business. Mr. Arvind Virmani joins us this evening. Good evening, Mr. Virmani. If I had to ask you of the many things that the government can do at this point of time, what should be the top 3, if not 5, that they must definitely look at to revive growth?
Basically, the budget is first of all about taxes and expenditures, and second about the financial sector, including policies towards equity and FDI. So most of the focus of the budget would be on that. Now, within that, to answer your question, in my view, given the analysis one has done about the underlying causes of the decline in GDP growth, basically on the tax side, the 2 most important things in my view are the simplification of the direct tax code, which has been in the works for a long time, but at least the government now about 6 months ago received the report of its internal committee on how to go about it. So it seems to me that finally it's all ready, and I would certainly hope that is put into place, because that is important not just for individuals and salaried people, but the 90% or let's say 80% to 90% of the people who are self-employed, because it is the corporate tax affects only the corporate sector, which may be 10% or so of the economy, but the rest of the economy really the key is the direct tax code. So in my view, the simplification of that direct tax code, which has been pending for a decade or more, really is the most vital element. The second one is some indication of the GST. As a lot of people have realized, as we kind of, those of us who have worked on GST, the VAT, for decade and a half, had suggested that to make it as simple as possible. Unfortunately, that was not done, but still, the point is now I hope and of course there is a GST council which will ultimately decide, but I hope the finance minister in the budget will give some direction that this problem is understood, because it has negatively affected a lot of small business and traders. So these two things taken together would be most vital. And let me put it in a slight context. You know, there's been a lot of measures and focus on kind of suppressing and eliminating the black economy. But unfortunately, not enough was done on the white economy to get people, to incentivize them to move from the black to the white. So these two measures are absolutely critical.
Okay, so you spoke about the DTC, which was effectively in cold storage all this while, and yes, I do agree with you. It's interesting to see the government bring it back. Simplification of GST, a demand that's been by from the industry as well. What about the individuals, Dr. Virmani? Do you think that it will be prudent for the government to look at an income tax cut to give more money in the hands of people right now?
Yes, I think ideally, in fact, I had written before the last budget several articles on this. The problem now, of course, is that because of the decline in the economy, there is a natural reduction in revenues and also in the denominator. So the fiscal deficit, even if nothing more is done, is going to go up by the order of 0.4 to 0.5%. So the question is, should the government, will the government be able to, given the FRBM constraints, to take that measure? If it is, yes, I would agree with that a certain amount of reduction of the overall tax rates designed to basically increase compliance in the short term, or rather increase compliance, but in the short term it may reduce revenues, but in the longer run it will increase the buoyancy and the elasticity of revenues. So question is whether the government can find some way to allow this extra boost in terms of fiscal deficit, in terms of the FRBM. But if they are able to do it, certainly I would advise in that direction.
Yeah, you know, a lot of it is also about the sentiment, and on one side is the sentiment of the people, sentiment of the consumers. It's also the sentiment of the industries, because if they don't feel bullish, and optimistic about the future, they're not going to be putting in money for expansion. They're not going to be setting up more manufacturing facilities or building new hotels and whatnot. And I'm looking at a survey that was done of 50 CEOs by Business Standard, Dr. Virmani. And a large percentage, over half of them, believe that this year is going to be just as bad, if not worse, than what we saw in 2019. Would you agree that, yes, there is a fear that the slowdown might continue for longer than we anticipated?
Before I go on to answer your question, I must mention that the other part is the financial. Part of that business sentiment is because the credit channels, the flow of money has been clogged. So that's part of what one expects in the budget and from the RBI subsequently. So taking your question directly, yes, I think the measures already taken by the government and RBI have kind of put a floor on it. So I do not expect the economy to going down. I think the floor has been reached either in Q2 or Q3. I'm fairly confident that Q4 there will be a slight recovery. But the question is that we expect a kind of U-shaped recovery, and it is very important that some of the measures which I've already mentioned, along with others connected with the credit flows and the credit channels, will help accelerate this recovery. Because if nothing more is done, then we could be in that 5.5% type of growth rate for much longer than kind of would be acceptable to either business or consumers. So the issue really is the measures which need to be taken to accelerate the recovery. Not that do not expect it to go down further, but that's not a consolation enough. We would like to go back to the order of 7 to 8% growth in, let's say, 2 years. And for that, we need to do a lot more of reforms.
Okay, my last question to you before I let you go, and we spoke about, the kind of measures that can be taken by the government. Now, the big task and the big challenge for the finance minister and this government will be to figure out where are they going to get the money. If they need to get the expenditure going, if they need to continue with the public and the government investment in various sectors, where will they get the money, Dr. Virmani?
Excellent question. The two most important ones are, of course, where there's been a lot of consensus already is in sale of particularly of loss-making public sector companies, which gives a double whammy in terms of the money received for them and also the reduction in the losses, so to say. So you get a double whammy. But even profitable companies where the private sector can improve the efficiency, they would make money. So there is clearly one of the important ways. The second one, which is more difficult politically, but again worth considering, is that certain subsidies are very, very inefficient. So I'll just give you one example, given the shortage of time, that is the fertilizer subsidy. It really is bad for the environment. There's overuse of fertilizer, etc. So if somehow they could use that money and put it directly in the hands of farmers, that would be a good reform. It would benefit the farmers, it would benefit the environment, and it would benefit growth. So there are these and other subsidies which could be used in this manner.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and of course we will connect with you closer to the budget for more insights and expert views. So thank you so much, Dr. Virmani. Appreciate you joining us on this big conversation that we've lined up. And Dr. Virmani there, a former Chief Economic Advisor to India, really setting the tone for the conversation that we are going to have for the next half hour further with more experts who are joining us right now. And the larger conversation again is, what do we do to kickstart the growth? The new year has begun, calendar new year has begun. What can the government, the Modi government, do to ensure that we are not stuck in this 4 to 6% growth band for too long? Because then that spells bad news for us. A couple of quarters is okay, maybe acceptable. We've gone through it. We've pretty much survived that. But what from here on? And we've put together a panel of experts who are giving us their ideas, and perhaps the government can take a note. Prime Minister Modi just recently met a set of economists as well. He's been taking views from everyone. Nirmala Sitharaman has been, meeting people and taking feedback. Here is some more coming their way, because this needs to be priority number one for this government, contrary to what you actually might see making headlines on national televisions on most nights. Let's say good evening to our panelists, Mr. R. Ramakumar, economist at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, is joining us this evening. Vishwas Pathak, spokesperson for the BJP. Archana Garodia Gupta, chairperson for FICCI National MSME Committee. And Professor Nagraj, professor with IGIDR and an economist, joining us this evening. In fact, let me begin with Professor Nagraj in this one. Professor Nagraj, what would be the key things that you suggest government does on priority to revive growth?
Yeah, my priority would be stepping up of public infrastructure investment, mainly in roads, national highways, railways, and renewable energy, that is solar. Then investment in Employment Guarantee Scheme, NREGS, National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. Third would be Yeah, the third would be channeling money for MSMEs under priority sector lending and making the rules stricter for money to be spent on that. Okay, right. So I think, and one thing government should do at this moment is not stick to fiscal orthodoxy. I think we have stuck to fiscal orthodoxy for too long. I think that has cost the economy in terms of growth and loss of employment. So at this moment, when the economy is in slump, what is required is prioritizing employment and output growth rather than sticking to fiscal conservatism. So I think the government needs to look differently. I mean, look for different solutions than what it has been doing in the past. And in a situation like this, there is no harm in breaching the fiscal deficit targets, as long as the money in this is used for productive purpose. If the debt incurred by the government is in domestic currency, held by domestic nationals, and used for productive purpose, I think there is nothing wrong in incurring debt, incurring public debt. So I think fiscal orthodoxy is not the time, is not to be followed at this time, and we must think of fiscal expansion, and for the purposes I have just mentioned earlier.
Okay, let me take that point across to Mr. Ramakumar as well. Did you agree with that? And I was just reading a comment that was made by Anand Mahindra, and he recently said that they're expecting, a big bang set of announcements by the finance minister in this budget, because we really need to fix our economy and get the growth going. What would your expectation be? What should the finance minister focus on first?
Well, whenever this government talks
budget
about big bang
budget
announcements, I always get worried rather than being very happy about it. So I'm a bit wary about the word big bang from this government. Let me put it in a different way. I think the first necessity towards addressing the crisis that we have today is to accept that there is a crisis. I don't think the government has yet accepted that there is a serious economic crisis or a slowdown that we have in our country. It has been in denial, and even if some people have deviated from it, been more realistic, they have only tried to say that we have a very temporary sort of a cyclical sort of a slowdown, and it is going to pick up very soon. All evidence points to the fact that it is not anymore a cyclical crisis, which would automatically grow out itself by itself, and there is a serious question that is in front of us, that the government is not accepting the crisis in its full proportion. Number one, it has to accept it. Number two, once it accepts it and sort of has a correct diagnosis of the problem, it will realize, A, that it is not a cyclical question that we have, it is a structural problem that we have. Number two, it will realize also that the real problem in our country is on the demand side and not on the supply side, as it has been sometimes in the past. Now, once you then accept the fact that it is the demand side constraint is a serious constraint that we have, you have to think about steps to address it. Now, most importantly, the demand comes from rural areas. Data from FMCG surveys, data from other surveys that we have in the market all show that rural demand and rural consumption are at an all-time low. Particularly in the more recent months of 2019. This means that you need to address the agrarian crisis in the rural areas and also the crisis of employment in the rural and urban areas. This is one of the most important necessities of the time of today. While agricultural prices do show some signs of increase in the last few months, agricultural prices have largely remained subdued, and this has meant that farmers' incomes have not risen at all in the recent past. This is one of the most important reasons for the demand slowdown that we have, rural demand being the most important component of overall aggregate demand in our country. Now, how to address this is the question. I agree with Professor Nagaraj that the government has to come out of the fiscal sort of conservatism that it has been stuck in for a very long period of time. It has refused to see it as a demand problem and has refused to increase public expenditure and investment, particularly in rural areas, infrastructure, social security programs, which actually puts money directly in the hands of the poor, and so on. So this conservatism in the fiscal policy has to be rejected, and the government has to increase expenditure and investment in the economy, particularly in rural areas, and more specifically in employment. In employment, you should look at women's employment, because that's where the hit has been very significant over the last few years. If you look at the two NSSO surveys that have come out, one second, let me just complete. Two NSSO surveys that have come out recently between 11 and 17 and 18, you will see that A, rural employment has crashed, and B, you will see that rural consumption has crashed.
Correct.
You also have seen rural consumption of food has also fallen. So these are very serious issues that we have, and we need to come out of it through a serious program of fiscal expansion, and for that fiscal conservatism should be rejected. There is no doubt about it.
Okay, so let me get a response, quick response from Mr. Vishwas Pathak on the points that have been made. And the point that for the longest time, the government was actually in denial, and that the government was trying to underplay this and say it's a cyclical slowdown. Mr. Pathak, is this still a cyclical slowdown that will automatically emerge out of?
See, there is no question of denial of the situation. The very fact is that Finance Minister has been traveling all across India and meeting various segments. And the very fact that Honorable Prime Minister is meeting all the who's who of the industries and economists, that shows that economy is at a challenging stage. What is this challenging stage? See, world's 10 first economies, which contribute 72% of the market share of the world, are facing this problem. India and China, which is going to achieve something like 6% or so growth, all other 8 economies are below 2%. So it's a global economy, and our import and export is around 42% of the GDP. Therefore, we cannot see this problem in isolation. However, this Finance Minister and this Prime Minister, they are working together and taking advices from the industries, and you will certainly find there will be some simplification in direct taxes. On GST front, government is getting comfort that 1 lakh plus crores per month is going to get it. And this is the only government which has not increased any direct taxes for last 6 years. On the contrary, they have increased the slabs, given more deductions. And on indirect taxes front also, our indirect taxes used to be 22 to 23%, which has come down to 18% average. I think government is doing proper balance. I fully agree. On fiscal deficit front, government may relax. This government may relax in view of the situation as a one-time measure, and more sentiments of domestic investors as well as international investors will also be enhanced, so that more investments comes apart from government spending.
No, but that's all fine, Mr. Pathak, and obviously a lot more has to be done, and our experts are giving us those points. I wasn't saying the government is in denial anymore. I was saying that the government was in denial for too long. Now look at what the consumer confidence survey is telling you, and I'm quoting the survey that was done, the latest one that the Reserve Bank of India has put out. They say that the consumer confidence in India dropped to its lowest since 5 years. Lowest in 5 years, since the time Prime Minister Modi was voted to power the first time. And if you ask people, point by point in different categories, the fall has been the worst when it comes to the economic situation. It's also bad when it comes to employment. In September 2019, if the consumer confidence had gone down by 24 points, in November also it was down by 33.1. Price level, income, overall consumer confidence index has dropped. Now, why were we waiting for so long to start acting now in November, December, January? We let it get to this point is what our experts are pointing out right now.
Tanvi, it's not like that. Like Mr. Viramani and Mr. Junjunwala spoke on your channel just now only. See, this growth of GDP, which is bottomed out, is going to reverse now. Reason being, the same government for last 5 years took various measures which were long pending. GST implementation was must, demonetization was must, bankruptcy code was must, insolvency and bankruptcy, then twin balance sheet, NPS, everything all put together, this government has applied. Now the foundation is very strong, and as Honorable Prime Minister has mentioned, that hereafter this economy will be on very strong footing, and it will be a reversal and it will go upwards only.
Mr. Ramakumar, do you want to respond to that before I go across to Archana Garodia?
No. I come back to my Big Bang problem in the beginning, which is that I remembered that when he said that demonetization was a required step in India. I think this is one of the problems that we have now. That is, when I said the government is still in denial and it is not accepting the full scale of the problem, what I also meant was that it has to accept that blunders like demonetization have to be called blunders, and conscious steps have to be taken to address the destruction of supply chains, the destruction of demand in general, destruction of small production, etc., which have been caused by what he calls as much needed measures like demonetization and a botched up, implemented in haste GST. Now, these are problems, and we have to accept it as problems, and only then we can think about a proper solution to these problems. That is my serious problem with the comment just made. We have to accept that we need a large-scale rebuilding of demand in the economy. Small production is in serious crisis. Agricultural production has, the profits from agricultural production have dwindled. Costs of production in agriculture have gone up. Rural employment has crashed. Rural consumption has crashed. People are eating less food than in the past. These are, as a result, poverty for the first time after the 90s has actually probably risen by at least 5% percentage points across India. These are serious problems and have to be accepted as the symptoms of a major crisis. So this is not an ordinary situation that we are facing. It is an extraordinary situation that we are facing, and I see no sign that the government is seeing it as an extraordinary situation.
Let me actually also bring in Archana Garodia, and Archana represents the MSME, the medium and small enterprise segment that has been going through a lot of pain, and you know the smaller industries and these enterprises are simply shutting down one after the another. What's going on, Archana? What is plaguing the MSME industry, and how do we revive that as an integral part of the problem we are looking at?
Fall in
Archana
rural
Garodia,
demand.
can you hear me?
So the first point government has to look at is reviving demand. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, please.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So as I said, the first thing is to revive demand, which could be through, as the previous speaker said, transferring money to the rural populace through various schemes. Paying up, the government has a lot of dues which it has not paid, and government PSUs have dues which need to be paid to MSMEs. So, and the other way of reviving demand is looking at exports. You see, exports can be a huge scope for us, and a lot of the you could have tax incentives to improve exports. You could also focus on creating manufacturing hubs in India, for which you will need to do a lot of structural reform, or at least in those hubs, create a very easy way of doing business. Mostly people don't like to come to India because they get stuck with a lot of regulation. So we have seen countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam shoot ahead of us in garments, which has always been a traditional strength. And that's mostly because of regulation. It's not because of labor costs or anything. It's because of the amount of paperwork that companies have to face. So that is something to focus on, to create easy, to dismantle this kind of very hard paperwork that is required for people coming in to set up export-oriented units. The third element of demand would be from government enterprises. And here, as I said, payment is a big issue because the PSUs, there are many enterprises which have 6 months of dues from the government and they don't have the bandwidth to accept that. So if the government, say, a suggestion that we have given in FICCI is that why don't people just, the PSUs have, say, a 15-day payment policy. That will really push in money and it will create demand for the MSMEs. The second point which I would like to talk about is availability of finance. Now, because of the demand crisis, a lot of MSMEs are on financially, they've become a little shaky. And at the same time, the banks have clamped up and credit flow has decreased. And there is also an NBFC crisis, which was reaching out to MSMEs and supplying some of their needs. So we are in a bind because access to funds, if you see lending to MSMEs, it has really dried up. There has been no growth in lending to MSMEs in the last few years. So again, the government needs to step in here and make credit much more easily available to MSMEs, preferably collateral free based on their things. And maybe one of the ways could be to strengthen NBFCs because the NBFCs can reach out and they have lower NPAs. So this could be one way of getting credit to the MSMEs. The third thing I would like to talk about is removing barriers for the MSMEs to do business. Here, I would like to say that the way the GST is, it has created certain problems for business people. Number one, the number of reports and the kind of compliance required has gone up exponentially. Maybe, you need to file 10 times the returns that you used to have to file. The second is because there is a strong element of refund required from the government for exports and even for many domestic sales, and those refunds invariably get delayed. It's creating working capital problems and people are exiting, especially export, because you don't get the refunds on time and people just get stuck and their working capital gets over and they shut shop. So this is something very crucial when you're looking at both for demand and for finance. These are three, I think, in terms of three major prongs.
I want to just pick up that point that you made.
Is encouraging
and
women
let me just
and
take it across. Let me just take three of these points, Archana, and I will come back to you. And Professor Nagaraj, if we can, speak more about the problem of working capital. The fact is that for all businesses, especially for smaller businesses, they don't have enough money in the pipeline. The cycles have shrunk, perhaps as a fallout of the reforms that were brought in, perhaps as a fallout of demonetization or now GST. But fact of the matter is that the businesses don't have enough money in hand, which is just hurting them more. Also what Archana was referring to. Now, is there a solution to this problem, or is it something that we just have to go through until the economy formalizes more and everybody just gets used to the new formalized system?
I'm not too bothered about formalization. India is a country of large informal sector. It will continue to be there for a long time. But I agree with the previous speaker that there is a problem of working capital. Okay, and banks lending to small scale MSMEs is problematic, and I think there's a genuine issue there which needs to be addressed. I think but it's also true. It's also true that the GST and demonetization have destroyed the informal economy, and how to rebuild it is something which one needs to think about. This is where I think the bank needs to have special windows to help MSMEs. In fact, last year we did a large survey of 10 clusters across the country. Invariably, everywhere we found that the MSMEs were hard pressed for working capital. So I think the point which the previous speaker made about working capital, I fully endorse, and this should be taken up on a priority basis. But it's also true that overall there's no shortage of liquidity in the economy. In fact, the State Bank chairman has said there is enough money available if the entrepreneurs are coming forward to invest. So the problem for the aggregate economy, can I complete? See, for the aggregate economy,
Yes, please.
the problem is from the demand side. There are not enough fresh investment projects coming up because there is not adequate demand. And that's the reason why we people have been suggesting, many of us have been suggesting, that the public's investment is necessary to kickstart the economy. Let me give you one important statistic which is often missed in this discussion. See, in the last 10 years, investment rate in the economy as a percentage of GDP has fallen by 10 percentage points, from 38% in 2008-9 to 29% in the most recent year. This kind of 10 percentage point decline in investment rate has never happened since independence. This is a serious issue which has not caught attention of the policymakers, and which I have been highlighting in various fora. So I think if we want to get the investment levels back to where we were, okay, there is a need for government stepping in up to the point when the private sector has enough confidence to make large scale investment. Okay, so this is the reason we have been saying that public infrastructure investment and investment in rural areas for NREGA would make a lot of difference, and all this would require a giving up of fiscal orthodoxy, which means the government should be willing to spend more by borrowing, and government should be willing to forego the fiscal deficit targets for a few years until the economy comes back to full steam. Okay, so this is, I feel, is a central problem which needs to be addressed.
Mr. Pathak, is that something that the government could look at, spending more, borrowing more and spending more, because nobody else seems to be spending in this country, not the consumer and not the businesses. Nobody is investing in this country. No, I was just looking at some fresh data that has come in, and if you simply look at the amount of electricity that is being produced, and viewers, this is a very interesting indicator that one can have, which is the amount of electricity that a country produces, because if the industries and manufacturing facilities and factories are not using enough power, is a sign that they're not producing enough, because they don't need to, because there is no demand in the market. And if you look at that data, that is what it suggests, that in India, month after month after month, the electricity generation is going down. India supplied less electricity for the 5th consecutive month in December. And that's just a sign, Mr. Pathak, that it's, the last 5 months have been really, really bad. Now, how much is the government willing to spend to carry on the burden when the private sector won't?
See, certainly government will look into various aspects of bringing more funds. Funds can be by way of FDI, there can be disinvestment of the investments government is holding, and there could be many more other proposals. Government may also work out the plans whereby these industries, those who are getting those incentives and all kind of things, that can also be looked into. I think overall this budget we will see that the U-turn of growth will happen. And one point which I wanted to make, that for last 6 years without increasing tax rates, this government is ensuring growth year on year, 7%, 8% for the first 3-4 years. I think because of the fiscal discipline, this is happening. As far as demonetization is concerned, again I am telling you, because of the series of reforms taken by this government, we can achieve this without increasing tax rates. And for informal economies which were really making extra profits by evading taxes, they are feeling the brunt. Otherwise, those who are doing their business very honestly, they are happy with this GST implementation.
Are they? It's not about honesty, Archana Garodia. Is it about honesty? Is it simply about people who don't want to be doing their transactions, recording their bills, putting it all their business on record? Are they the only ones who are unhappy with GST? Because you were just mentioning that GST has made life difficult for others as well.
No. So here I'd like to say something. Most of India is in the informal economy, and they do not even, the limit for filing GST is 40 lakhs, right? Most of the businesses which are there in India are below this limit. So they are not evading the law and they are not being dishonest when they're not filing GST. The problem is, as our previous speakers have very ably emphasized, the problem is of demand, number one. And number two, I'd like to say I filed GST.
Ma'am, excuse me, then why this revenue has gone up?
Eight GST numbers. I have to file 300 returns. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please. Finish your point.
See the number of returns which are required to be filed for GST. Yeah, number of returns that have to be filed have gone up. I believe the government is taking some positive steps, and instead of having to file 3 returns quarterly, we hope to have to file 3 returns per month. We hope to have to file 1 return per quarter. That will give a lot of relief. The second point is, while the government has been responsive in the GST Council, there is still a very big refund problem, which has led to funds being stuck with the government and creating big working capital problems for the people who are in the GST cycle. So this is not about honesty. This is a feedback to you from the industry, sir, and please take it as such that this thing really needs to be looked at. It is causing a barrier to working, and we need to reduce the compliance load, and we need to remove the system which requires you to give a lot of refund. That is a kind of barrier which has been placed by GST. Otherwise, it's a very good idea, and we all support the idea of having less, being able to move freely within the states.
Of course, I don't think anybody will, has a larger problem with a unified tax code. It's just that the smaller problems within how it works right now have to be fixed, have to be simplified. Mr. Vishwas Pathak, go ahead, please respond now to what Archana Garodia is saying.
I fully agree. Whatever suggestions she has given, it will be certainly taken up. All I'm trying to say that without increasing tax rates, how our tax revenue has gone up. It means there was evasion of taxes, and that taxes which are now brought into the system, I'm talking about those. So there was avoidance, evasion of taxes, and GST has really played a major role for that.
Okay, quick comment from Ramkumar before I wrap this up. Ramkumar, the issue that you raise and is much spoken about, any ideas on how do we go about fixing that? One, obviously unemployment, and in that rural unemployment is a big concern. Those who've lost their jobs in cities have also gone back to their own towns and villages because they have nothing else to do, and that's adding to the problem in the rural sector as well. How does the government fix it? If not in the budget, outside the budget, what can we look at?
Just one small point before that. The claim being made that the tax revenues have actually risen. They have not. I don't know where that number comes from. Direct tax revenues have sort of stagnated, and indirect tax revenues, yes, in the last month, the news comes out that GST collections have crossed
last 2 months, yes,
that line of 1 lakh crore a month. But that's sort of more of a statistical illusion rather than a real increase in tax revenues, because that's largely because there have been suo motu revisions in the filing of annual returns. There have been limits placed by the central government on the extent of input tax credits that could be claimed, and also there have been there is some reform that have come in e-way bills. So it is through all these, it is because of all these issues that GST revenues have crossed the 1 lakh crore mark in a month, and that's more likely to be a one-time thing rather than a permanent increase in tax revenues. That's one point. But coming back to your question, when you look at aggregate demand, the place you have to look for is the rural areas. Now, in rural areas, there are two sets of problems. One set of problems, the first set of problems is in the production sector in agriculture, where farmers' incomes have sort of declined in real terms over the last 4 or 5 years. Now, fixing this is the most important challenge of today. We have to look at ways in which either through increase in MSP or through other different kinds of transfers to the farmers. How can farmers' incomes be increased and production be revitalized, particularly among the small and marginal farmers? That's the key challenge in the production sector in agriculture in rural areas. The second is across the large set of landless laborers in agriculture, there is a serious crisis of employment, not just in agriculture, also rural laborers at large. Now, this has to be tackled through large-scale generation of employment in the rural areas, through employment generation programs like NREGS, and through programs of infrastructural investment, which will generate a lot of employment in rural areas. So it is very clear what has to be done, certainly in the short run, in order to get the country out of the crisis. The question, I again repeat, is that the government has not yet admitted that it is a demand problem, and only if it admits that there is a demand problem can it come out with solutions to address the demand problem, which is increasing expenditure. And when you decide to increase expenditure, once you realize that there aren't enough tax revenues to fund that increase in expenditure, you will have to necessarily look at borrowing and hence relax the fiscal constraints that you have through the FRBM acts. So it's a chain. It's a logical chain. You accept the problem, you find the location of the problem and the state of the problem, and then you try to address it. If you follow this chain logically, the solutions become very clear, certainly in the short run. I'm not sort of speculating about the long-term or medium-term measures here. In the short run, certainly we need a major step up in public expenditure and public investment, certainly in rural areas, with focus on employment, with focus on social security, which will put money into the hands of the poor, which will allow them to spend, and which will contribute in a big way to aggregate demand, which will over a period of time, because if demand rises, credit demand will rise, and the liquidity that is stuck in the banks will be taken off by the private sector, and they will generate more jobs, more employment, more growth. It's a very simple problem. It's a very simple solution, but the government has for some reason not accepted that the problem is as simple as it really is. That is a serious problem that we have today.
Well, Mr. Ramakumar, putting it very simply, and simplifying it for us and making it sound very easy. Now, one can only hope that the government is actually able to also carry it out in the way you've really, summarized it for us and put it in such a simple manner. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining us. Spending, spending, spending. The government needs to start spending first. Only when the government starts spending in public infrastructure, in new units, and putting the money out there, will we actually see some amount of economic activity begin. And then the cycle from all over, from private to public, can actually pick up pace. One focus has to be the rural area. Not enough focus has been put there. From farmers to the laborers, rural India was literally the backbone of the growth that we saw in the last 10-15 years. That's where the spending was coming from. That's where the demand was coming from, because people in the rural were doing well. And if they don't, then look what happens to your economy. And look how everything starts tanking. So yes, while in the corporate sector, the tax cuts, the tax breaks, the tax simplification, all of this will have to be done. And I'm pretty sure that will get addressed in one way or the other during the budget or before and after that. The government is already looking at it. You need to start looking at how to create employment, how to give us more jobs. The number of youngsters who are hitting the job market on an annual basis is serious business. We need those number of jobs being created. And put the spotlight outside the main cities into the rural hinterland if you really want to fix the problem. 5% growth is not acceptable. It's alarming. Let's talk more about jobs. Let's talk more about growth. Let's fix the problem. Thank you so much for joining us on this discussion. Today, Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh Yogi Adityanath announced a big, long-awaited police reform in a first for the state. Two of the biggest cities, Noida and of course the capital city of Lucknow, have now got police commissioners to head the city's police force. Uttar Pradesh along with Bihar and Madhya Pradesh were the only states in India that didn't have the police commissionerate system. Now UP giving in to the fresh law and order challenges to growing population has introduced at least this system in two of its biggest cities. What does this really mean? How does it impact us? What are the pros and the cons? The next few minutes will be spent simply on trying to understand that, and who better to explain to us than our managing editor, Vinay Tiwari, who's joining me from our Mumbai newsroom. Vinay, let's begin with what is the commissionerate system?
So very simply, Tanvi, I think a lot of viewers would have heard these nomenclatures in newspapers or on television, and sometimes we refer to them as superintendents of police or SSPs of districts, and sometimes we call them DCPs. So what's really different between them? So 53 cities currently had the system of commissioners as part of the police force. Simply put, there is a difference in the powers that are enjoyed by a commissionerate system as opposed to a city which has the superintendent of police or the senior superintendent of police system. Now, what are those powers that are different? In the cities where there is no commissionerate system, there is a dual accountability concept, which means that the law and order responsibility is not just with the police, but the supervisory role is also played by the district magistrate. That's the big key difference, which means the DM actually can instruct the SP or the SSP on certain law and order functions. Remember, as part of policing and law and order, two things very critical. And Tanvi, both those things came in they were hugely in news because of the kind of unrest we saw during CAA and then the NRC protests, which was riot control and mob control. In a system where there is no commissionerate system, the police cannot order a lathi charge or order firing on their own. They have to wait for an instruction in writing from the SDM or the district magistrate before they can actually go ahead and do that as a matter of law and order control. In a commissionerate system, the ACP or the DCP doesn't really have to wait for the civil administration to say yes or no. He can issue that order himself or herself. So that's the one big difference. It speeds up the implementation of law and order should an emergency situation arise. And remember, in UP, there was an allegation sometimes, or at least the corridor of whispers often said that because there was a delay from the OK that came from the civil administration, the police delayed action on their own. So this has always been a bit of a battle between the two systems. That's the one big difference. The other big difference, Tanvi, is that the magistrates in cities which do not have commissionerates also carry out a lot of preventive actions. You know, under CRPC, there are a lot of provisions like the 151, 57, where people are bound down, they're externed, or sometimes they are even punished or taken into preventive custody. All those courts were held by the district magistrate. In a commissionerate system, the DCP and above can do it at their own office itself. They don't have to go send the person to a civil administration office. There is no exchange of files that happens. It can be done right there at the DCP level office. So it speeds up implementation of law and order, and it also removes the dual accountability concept, Tanvi.
Okay, so it removes the dual accountability concept, essentially, makes it faster. Will it essentially also give more powers to police? Is that what the big change can be then?
Oh, absolutely. It certainly gives more powers to the police because, number one, there is no oversight that is there from the civil administration. The SP or the SSP doesn't really have to listen or wait for an order or an OK from the district magistrate, so they get more power. Remember, the commissionerate system also there is a higher degree of ranking officer that is posted there, which means in Noida and Lucknow, where the two cities where the commissionerate is going to come in, there will be an additional DG rank officer. Remember, currently the districts were being headed by an SSP rank officer. An additional DGP rank officer is 3 ranks senior to an SSP. So it obviously means that the supervision quality is better. And under the additional DG rank officer, there will be at least 2 joint commissioners who are in other cities equivalent to an IG. Remember, most districts are headed by SSPs. The IGs are usually part of ranges, which constitute 3 or 4 districts. So it improves the power, the authority that the police has. As of now, there was accountability, but maybe there was a divided authority. It also increases the supervision quality because of a greater seniority level of officers that are posted at the commissionerate office.
All right, thank you for decoding that for us and putting it in simple words for us to understand what is the commissionerate system, why is it important, and why is it that Lucknow and Noida are only getting this now. Thanks, Vinay, for joining us. Let's also say good evening to MG Devashyam, former IS officer, former district magistrate, joining us this evening. Mr. A.L. Banerjee, former DGP of Uttar Pradesh, as well with us. But if I can actually begin with Mr. Devashyam. Mr. Devashyam, is this a good way to go forward? Would we call this a reform where the police actually gets more powers and doesn't have to keep running to a DM or somebody for permission to act on ground?
Before going into this, whether it's good or bad, I would like to give the background. The criminal administration is governed by the Criminal Procedure Code. which is still in vogue. Criminal Procedure Code vests the powers of maintenance of law and order with the district magistrate, and for whom the police is only an instrumentality. That's what the Punjab Police Manual says, which I have administered. I am from the Haryana cadre. I have been district magistrate of Chandigarh and other districts. Now, CRPC is still there. Section 133 is still there. Section 144 is still there. That has not been amended. Now, police manual, as far as Punjab is concerned, still continues, which clearly says police is an instrument given to the district magistrate for maintenance of law and order. Now, what you have done under the police commissioner system is we have vested the powers of the district magistrate with the police commissioner. That's what that you have done. Now, the question is whether it is right or wrong. Now, police has got certain distinct functions. Most important of that is the criminal administration. That means prevention of crimes, detection of crimes, investigation of crimes, prosecution of crimes, and getting the guilty punished. That is the most important duty. Law and order is a secondary duty. Law and order doesn't happen always. Crimes happen always. So law and order, you are dealing with the people, the ordinary people, poor people, where you can't give unfettered power to an uniformed force. Trigger happy. You got to have some oversight. Your person who just explained that, he was saying dual control. There is no dual control. This is basically to give protection to the ordinary man from the excesses of the police force. Now, police force, what happens, you have seen in UP, what has been happening is all kind of encounters and all this. Basically, CRPC has structured a kind of system wherein there is some kind of oversight. Any kind of uniformed force, particularly this uniformed force is working with the people at every level, poorest of the poor, tribals and all these people. So in my view, in the Indian context, there has to be an oversight as far as we are not, district magistrate does not interfere in any way regarding the criminal prevention of crimes, detection of crimes, investigation, prosecution. He doesn't interfere at all. That is now with the judicial magistrates. After the separation of powers in the Constitution of India, judicial magistrates have taken over the responsibility. The executive magistrate, I'll just finish it. The executive magistrate headed by the district magistrate are only the oversight of the police so that they don't commit excesses. And people, the ordinary folk, has a grievance mechanism. If they have grievance against the police, they can go and tell the district magistrate who can intervene and effectively. That system is being destroyed by this police commissionerate system.
Okay, so you say that there is a need for an oversight to ensure that there are no excesses, to ensure there are no trigger-happy cops who are roaming around. Mr. Rael Banerjee, all those allegations are still made against the UP police. Then is this a good decision, or is this a decision that could perhaps make it worse than what we are looking at?
Tanvi, we should, the police of Uttar Pradesh should thank Yogi Adityanath ji, Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, for an extremely courageous decision of introducing the Commissioner Police system in Uttar Pradesh in 2 places. Now, this means that today there are 73 places in India where there is a Commissioner Police system, and in which there are 2 which are more than 120 years old. Those places have not dropped out of the map, they remain there. These 2 also shall remain in the map. So any assumption that downtrodden or somebody will be under a police system of distress or duress is unfounded. Now let me clear one basic thing. The district magistrate becomes a district magistrate owing to the fact that he is given magisterial powers under the CRPC. Similar magisterial powers can be given to the police officers. That has been done in Calcutta. That was the first place where the Commissioner Police system came in around 1860s. The second is, of course, Mumbai. The third is Chennai or Madras, as it was called. And it was even followed by a large number of places, including in 1977 when Delhi became a Commissioner Police system. Now, the basic role of not a district magistrate, he is known as a collector and district magistrate. He used to collect revenue for the British. That's why they called him a collector. And because he used to keep the money, so therefore he had to have the police with him. So he was given judicial powers as well as police powers. Now, if today he is not collecting really, he may be collecting, he has a revenue work, so you have to distinguish between that. There is absolutely no problem. And as far as CRPC is concerned, CRPC is in its place under Section 20 and under Section 21 of the CRPC. Powers have been given to the officers concerned of the Commissioner of Police rank and those below for execution of duties. Now, my co-panelist was saying that there is no two-headedness. Yes, it is like polyandry. It is terrible. I have been SP of a couple of places, and I've always felt that district magistrate under Section 4 of the Police Act will invariably like to interfere in your work. Posting of station officers, he is interfering, whereas no district magistrate under the CRPC can give any guidance as far as investigation is concerned, which is a huge lot of work of the police stations or police. But district magistrates will go to the police thana, do an inspection. The SDMs will go to a police thana, do inspections, whatever for. How is that going to help the police? In fact, this is the kernel of the situation, that a wonderful decision has been taken by this chief minister, and we should go ahead with more cities which are beyond 10 lakhs. Look at the state of urbanization in India. If the police does not respond to this urbanization, if police does not respond to this modernization, how can we produce justice, or we produce any kind of law and order to these people? It is not possible. So this is an excellent decision. This is a wonderful decision. And I totally disagree with my co-panelist. The jobs of a collector and a district magistrate are two different things, two different hats worn by one single person.
Let me get a response from him.
Powers have been given to the police.
Yes.
It should not make anybody worried.
Let me get a response from him. Mr. Devashiam, do you want to respond to that?
Mr. Banerjee, you are arguing. Yeah, I will respond. Amend the Criminal Procedure Code. Why are you doing all this through the back door? Amend the Criminal Procedure Code and say magistracy has nothing to do with law and order. Magistracy has nothing to do with the police. Now, the Punjab Police Manual still says what I was telling earlier.
That has been done by the Delhi Police Act. That has been done by the Mumbai Act.
For maintenance of law and order. Now, wait a minute. Don't intervene.
That is only in the Punjab Police Act. Nowhere else.
So the question is...
Not in the Police Act. No. Do not mislead anybody.
No, wait a minute.
You are misleading people.
Please,
you are misleading people.
Let me complete. I am talking about Punjab Manual. Delhi was under Punjab. Delhi was following Punjab Manual. Let me clarify that. Let me continue. Let me clarify what you have mentioned about that. The collector was only meant to collect the revenue. British days, land revenue was the main item. They were collecting the revenue. But there was a oversight on the police. Otherwise, you see, wherever police commissioner has been... Let me complete, please. Don't intervene. Wherever police commissioner system is violated blatantly. I can openly say that in Chennai, I am from Tamil Nadu. At the drop of the hat, Chennai police people go and arrest girls who have been put in column in front of their house. Is this the way you are maintaining law and order? So you can't have that kind of thing. I have been in the army also. Army, when they are doing the duty of war, that's a different cup of tea altogether. You don't interfere. Whereas you are dealing with civilian population.
Okay.
Poorest of the poor, women. There has to be an oversight. Without oversight, police mechanism will run riot. There will be a complete violation of democratic rights. People will be...
Okay.
This is the kind of...
But I agree with you. I agree with you. There definitely has to be oversight.
So...
But perhaps perhaps in tricky situations, police on ground should also have some power. Mr. Devasham, I'm really sorry, but I've completely run out of time, so I have to intervene here and thank both of you gentlemen. But it was very good to hear both views, both sides of the story. Let's wait and watch how this really works out for Noida and Lucknow. And viewers, we picked up this story because we thought in the light of all that is happening in Uttar Pradesh, and we here repeatedly keep raising the issue of the UP police, their accountability, their expertise, their actions on ground, and we asked those questions. So we decided to try and understand if this is actually going to benefit, if this big reform, as it is being said, is actually going to improve the situation on ground. We'll wait and watch what really happens. For now, we're completely out of time on this edition of the Urban Debate. Let's go across to Avni, who's joining us with the last word. Avni, water wars in Delhi have now begun to unfold. What's on the menu tonight?
That's right, Tanvi, and water wars, and this time, of course, just weeks away from the Delhi elections, and the Aam Aadmi Party making sensational claims such that BJP's Haryana is poisoning the Yamuna River. And this issue, the fact is that ammonia in the Yamuna River is an issue that comes up every single year. Every single year, the ammonia levels go up during this time. But this time, this year, because it's an election year, it has become such a big point, such a big talking point. So the question really is water once again being politicized in the run-up to the elections? That's the debate today. Thanks, Tanvi.